The widow and the winter. The wind screamed across the high plains like a living thing that night, clawing at the corners of a small cabin perched on the edge of nowhere. The boards groaned with every gust, and snow sifted in through cracks that no amount of rags could seal. Inside, a single candle guttered in its holder, its light bending and trembling with every shudder of the wind. Nora Reynolds sat at the table, her thin hands wrapped around a tin cup of melted snow water. The fire in the stove had long gone cold, leaving only the faint smell of ash and iron. Her daughter, little Mary, lay asleep beneath their last wool blanket, her small body curled tight to keep in the warmth. The child's cheeks were flushed, but not from heat. Fever had taken hold 3 days ago, and it showed no sign of letting go. Nora watched her daughter's shallow breathing, every rise and fall of the child's chest a prayer. The sound of it, that faint, raspy rhythm, seemed to echo louder than the storm itself. The candlelight flickered over Mary's tangled curls and pale skin. She whispered, "Hold on, my love. Just hold on a little longer." There was no food left. Not a crumb. Not even a crust to soften with water. The cupboard stood bare, a hollow, splintered thing filled only with memories of better days. 6 months. That was how long it had been since influenza took Thomas. 6 months since she had buried her husband on a hill behind the cabin, the ground still soft with summer warmth. 6 months since she had promised him she would be strong, that she would take care of Mary no matter what. And every single day since then had been a test of that promise. At first, she'd tried to keep up the farm herself, mending fences, milking the cow, trading milk and eggs in Silverdale. But the cow had died when the first frost came. The chickens followed soon after. She'd sold off tools, quilts, even Thomas's hunting rifle. Then the plow. Then the last bit of her mother's silver. And still the debts crept closer, like the snow creeping under the door. Now all she had left was her hair. It was a deep auburn color, thick and shining even after weeks without washing. Thomas had loved it. "Sunset caught in your hair," he used to say. It was the one thing she had never thought to sell. But when your child is starving and feverish, pride becomes a luxury. Nora's fingers trembled as she reached up and touched the long braid resting over her shoulder. It was heavy, like a piece of her soul. But if it could buy bread, if it could buy medicine, then it was worth the sacrifice. She rose quietly, pulling on her threadbare shawl, and glanced once more at Mary. The little girl stirred, but didn't wake. Nora tucked the blanket tighter around her and whispered, "Mama will be back soon, my heart." Then she stepped into the storm. The cold hit her like a wall. It was the kind of cold that burned before it numbed, a sharp, biting cold that made her lungs ache and her eyes water. Snow came at her sideways, whipped by a wind that howled through the pines like a pack of wolves. The path to Silverdale was 7 miles of frozen mud and drifting snow, and she knew every bend and ridge by heart. Each step was agony. Her boots were cracked, the soles worn thin, and snow pressed through the seams to bite her feet. The shawl she'd wrapped around her shoulders was no match for the wind, but she clutched it tighter anyway. She couldn't afford to stop. If she did, she might never start again. Her breath came in ragged bursts. The world was wide and endless, a blur of snow and sky. Time became meaningless, and only the next step mattered. One foot in front of the other. Don't think. Don't feel. Just move. By the time she reached the outskirts of Silverdale, the faint light of dawn was creeping over the hills. Smoke curled from the chimneys, the smell of wood and bread teasing her empty stomach until it hurt. She stopped in front of Wilson's general store, the only place that might still have what she needed. The bell over the door jingled weakly as she pushed it open. The warmth inside hit her like a wave, sweet, heavy, and filled with the scent of flour and coffee. Behind the counter stood Mr. Wilson, a round man in his 50s with thinning hair and a face like weathered dough. He looked up as she entered, and his expression shifted. Surprise, then discomfort, then pity. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said carefully. "Out in this weather?" "I need bread," Nora said, her voice rough from cold and exhaustion. "And medicine. Fever powder." "My little girl," her voice caught. "She's been burning up for days." Mr. Wilson's eyes softened, but he shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't extend credit anymore. You still owe for the flour and lamp oil from last month. I can pay this time." Her voice was stronger now, desperation lending its steel. She reached up and pulled the braid over her shoulder. The auburn strands glowed like copper in the lamplight. I'll sell this. I heard wig makers in Denver will pay for good hair. Surely it's worth enough for a loaf and a bit of medicine? Wilson's face fell. Oh, Mrs. Reynolds, he sighed. It's fine hair, no doubt. But I don't buy hair and I can't. How much for the bread, Wilson? The voice came from the back of the store, deep, calm, and commanding. Nora turned. A tall man was standing between the shelves, half shadowed by the light from the window. He wore a long duster coat, dusted white with snow, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His boots were muddy, his gloves worn, but there was something about him, the stillness, the quiet authority, that made her straighten instinctively. 2 loaves. 40 cents, Wilson said quickly. The stranger stepped closer. And the medicine? 120 for fever powder. The man nodded. Add flour, sugar, coffee, and a little dried beef. He reached into his coat and pulled out a handful of coins, setting them on the counter with a soft clink. Nora's heart pounded. I can't accept charity, sir, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw his eyes, gray-blue like a storm rolling in over the plains. There was no pity in them, only something steady and quiet and deep. It's not charity, ma'am, he said. Consider it an advance. An advance on what? She asked, suspicious now. The man took off his hat and held out a gloved hand. Vincent Durand. I own a ranch 5 miles west. My cook left to chase gold in the mountains, and I've got a dozen men who'd appreciate a proper meal now and then. You come work for me and this'll be your first payment. Nora hesitated. I have a child, I heard. His voice softened, losing its edge. Keep your hair, Mrs. Reynolds, I'll feed you both. When they stepped outside, the wind had calmed a little, the snow falling gentler now, more like a whisper than a scream. Vincent loaded the supplies into his wagon and helped her climb up beside him. The horses stamped impatiently, their breath steaming in the cold air. You live far? He asked as they started down the road. East Ridge, near the river bend. He nodded, eyes fixed ahead. For a while they rode in silence, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the crunch of wheels on packed snow. Nora stole glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking. He was younger than she'd first assumed, maybe 30, 32, but his face was weathered, marked by sun and wind. He had the bearing of someone used to long days in the saddle, someone who'd seen hardship and learned not to flinch from it. Why are you helping us? She finally asked. He didn't answer right away. His hands tightened slightly on the reins. My mother was widowed when I was 6, he said at last. No one helped her, not once. She cut her hair 3 times before she couldn't anymore. Nora felt a lump rise in her throat. No woman should have to sell herself piece by piece to survive, he said quietly. The words hung between them, heavy as the snow-laden sky. When they reached her cabin, the sun was low, a pale disk behind the clouds. Vincent climbed down first, carrying the supplies inside. The moment the door opened, he paused, taking in the bare shelves, the thin blanket, the child lying pale and trembling on the bed. Without a word, he set to work. He poured water into a cup, measured out a small portion of fever powder, and mixed it carefully. My mother used to add honey to hide the bitterness, he said, searching the shelf. You got any? Nora shook her head. Then we'll make do, he said simply, holding the cup to Mary's lips. The child whimpered but swallowed, her tiny hand clutching his sleeve. For the next hour, Vincent moved through the small cabin like he'd lived there all his life, building the fire, setting a pot of water to boil, organizing supplies. Nora watched, torn between gratitude and disbelief. When he finally straightened, he said, I'll be back tomorrow with more. You focus on getting her well. When she's stronger, you can come out to the ranch. She wanted to protest, to say she owed him nothing, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just nodded, tears stinging her eyes. As he stepped outside, he turned back once. The fading light caught his profile, strong, solemn, and kind. Keep your hair, Mrs. Reynolds, he said again. You'll need it when the wind turns cruel. Then he was gone, his wagon wheels cutting deep tracks in the snow, leading west toward the mountains. Nora closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. For the first time in months, she felt something unfamiliar flicker to life inside her chest. Not quite hope, but close enough to make her tremble. Outside, the storm quieted. Inside, her daughter slept, her fever easing. And somewhere out there, a stranger who refused to let her dignity be sold was making his way home. A stranger's promise. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of fever, firelight, and whispered prayers. Each morning, Nora awoke before dawn to check on Mary, touching the child's forehead with trembling hands, afraid to find it burning hot again. But the fever had broken. Slowly, mercifully, it had passed, leaving Mary weak, but breathing easier, sleeping deeper. Every day, just as the frost began to glitter on the window, she'd hear the distant crunch of hooves and the creak of wagon wheels. He always came back, the cowboy named Vincent Durand. At first, she thought it might be out of pity. But pity fades, and he didn't. He'd bring supplies, flour, sugar, a slab of salted pork, even fresh milk from his ranch. He'd chop wood without being asked, fix the door that groaned on its hinges, and shovel a clear path through the snow without saying a word about it. Then he'd sit at the table for a few minutes, sipping the coffee she managed to brew for him, and ask about Mary. "Fever's down," he'd ask quietly. "Yes," Nora would say, "thanks to you." But he'd only nod, brushing off the gratitude as if it made him uncomfortable. "Not thanks to me. You're the one who kept her alive." The third day he came, he brought something new, a small jar of honey. "My mother swore it fixed everything but a broken heart," he said, setting it down on the table. Nora smiled faintly. "Then maybe it'll fix both of us." By the fourth day, the wind had softened and sunlight poured weakly through the frosted glass. Mary sat up for the first time in a week, her hair sticking up in messy curls, her cheeks flushed with something that almost looked like health. "Mama," she whispered, "is the cowboy coming today?" Nora brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "I expect so." Mary grinned sleepily. "He brings food and stories," Nora blinked. "Stories?" Mary nodded, her voice a whisper. "He told me about his horse, the one that doesn't like apples. And about a lady who used to sing to the stars." Nora's chest tightened. She hadn't heard her daughter speak so much in days. The sound of it, that small, innocent joy, nearly undid her. When Vincent arrived that afternoon, she met him at the door with tears in her eyes. "She's better," she said softly. "You saved her life." He shook his head, his hat shadowing his face. "You did that, Mrs. Reynolds. I just brought what you needed." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You brought more than that. You brought hope back into this house." For a moment he didn't speak. Then, with quiet sincerity, he said, "Hope belongs here. Always has." That evening he stayed longer than usual. The sun bled red across the snow, painting the world in copper and rose. Nora cooked a simple stew, the first proper meal in weeks. And they sat together at the table, the silence between them gentle now, almost companionable. "You said you needed a cook," she began cautiously. "I'd like to take that position if it still stands." He nodded once. "It does. I'd be glad to have you. I'll work hard," she promised. "I've cooked for a dozen men before. I can—" Vincent raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "You don't have to convince me. You've already shown what kind of woman you are." Something in the way he said it, quiet, steady, without flattery, made her cheeks flush. He finished his coffee and rose from the table. "I'll come for you both in 2 weeks. That'll give the little one time to get strong again." Nora nodded, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "We'll be ready." As he reached the door, he paused, glancing back. "And Mrs. Reynolds? Don't you ever try to trade your hair again?" Her lips parted in surprise. "How did you—" "Word travels fast in Silverdale," he said with a faint smile. "Besides, some things ain't meant to be sold. That hair, it's a crown, not a currency." Then he tipped his hat and stepped into the fading light. 2 weeks later, he returned just as he said he would. The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of brown earth and the first shy blades of grass. The air smelled different, not warm yet, but full of promise. Mary ran to the window as soon as she heard the sound of hooves. "Mama, he's here." Vincent had brought a covered wagon this time, loaded with supplies. He greeted Mary with a smile, crouching so his eyes met hers. "You look stronger than a spring colt, little miss." Mary giggled and hid behind her mother's skirt. Nora had packed what little they owned. A few dresses, her Bible, a cracked mirror, and Thomas's old pocket watch. The one thing she hadn't been able to part with. "Everything you want to bring?" Vincent asked. She nodded. "That's all of it." He helped her up into the wagon, then lifted Mary and tucked her beside her mother. The horses snorted and tossed their heads, eager to move. As the wagon jolted forward, Nora looked back at the small cabin, the home she and Thomas had built with their own hands. It stood silent, half buried in snow, a ghost of what it once was. She whispered a quiet goodbye. The ride to the Durand Ranch took over an hour. The land opened up as they traveled west, rolling hills, frozen streams, and mountains rising like silent sentinels against the horizon. Nora couldn't help but be struck by the vastness of it all. It was beautiful, but in that hard, unforgiving way the frontier always was. It demanded strength. It demanded survival. When they finally crested a ridge, she saw it, the ranch. A sprawling house of timber and stone stood at the heart of it, smoke curling from a wide chimney. Corrals spread out behind it, dotted with horses and cattle. Beyond that, the bunkhouse and stables. It was bigger than she'd imagined, far more prosperous than she'd expected from a man who dressed like a drifter. Your ranch. It's enormous, she murmured. Vincent smiled faintly. My father built the first cabin here. I built the rest. Hard work, a few good men, and a little luck. He drove the wagon around to a smaller cabin set just behind the main house. It was neat and sturdy with a porch that looked out toward the meadow. This'll be your place, he said. Close enough that you can work in the kitchen, but private enough to call your own. Nora stepped down and looked around, speechless. The cabin wasn't fancy, but it was warm, solid, and whole, more than she'd dared to dream of a month ago. Mr. Durand. She began, her voice shaking slightly. I don't know how to thank you. He tipped his hat again, his expression unreadable. By cooking me the best meal I've had in months. That'll do just fine. The first weeks at the Durand Ranch were exhausting. Cooking for a half-dozen ranch hands meant rising before dawn and working till long after dark. Nora quickly learned the rhythm of the place. The sound of boots on the porch before sunrise, the clang of tools, the laughter of men swapping stories over breakfast. But she also learned something else. They respected Vincent. Deeply. He didn't yell or threaten. He worked beside them, ate the same food, slept in the same bunkhouse when the work demanded it. When he spoke, they listened, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And that respect, she realized, came from the way he treated people. He never raised his voice to her. Never looked down on her. Never treated her like someone who needed saving. He gave her space, trust, and quiet understanding, things rarer than gold out on the frontier. Mary flourished too. She followed Vincent around the ranch whenever she could, asking endless questions that he always seemed to have an answer for. Mr. Vincent, why do cows have 4 stomachs? So they can eat what we can't, he'd say seriously, crouching down to her height. And why do horses sleep standing up? Because they're smarter than people. They know the ground's cold. Nora would watch from the kitchen window, her heart swelling with gratitude she didn't know how to name. One night, about a month after they'd arrived, a storm rolled in, wild and sudden. Lightning flashing across the plains. The men were out rounding up stray cattle. And Nora was alone in the main house preparing supper. She'd just pulled the bread from the oven when the door burst open and Vincent staggered in, soaked to the bone. Half the herd got spooked, he said, shaking off his hat. Took us near an hour to bring him back. Nora hurried to fetch a towel. You're drenched. Sit by the fire before you catch your death. He laughed quietly. You sound like my mother. She handed him the towel, her hands brushing his for just a moment. Rough, calloused skin meeting hers. The touch sent a spark through her that startled her. As he dried his hair, she found herself studying him in the firelight, the curve of his jaw, the faint scar near his temple, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. Why do you do it? She asked softly. He looked up. Do what? Help people, strangers, me. Vincent hesitated, staring into the fire. Because I know what it's like to be hungry. To feel invisible. My mother worked herself to death trying to prove she was worth the space she took up in the world. No one should live like that. Not while I've got more than I need. Nora swallowed hard. You're a good man, Mr. Durand. He smiled faintly, but there was sadness in it. Good men don't always start that way. Their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them felt charged, not with fear or debt or gratitude, but something softer. Something dangerous. Then Mary's laughter echoed from the other room, breaking the spell. Vincent stood, pulling on his coat. Storm's easing. I'll see you in the morning. Be careful, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He paused at the door, glancing back. Always am. That night, as the wind howled outside, Nora sat by the fire long after Mary had fallen asleep. She stared into the flames, thinking about the past, about loss and love and second chances. Vincent Durand had walked into her life the day she thought she'd lost everything. And in just a few short weeks, he'd given her something more valuable than bread or medicine or shelter. He'd given her the chance to stand tall again, and though she didn't yet know what it meant, she sensed something deeper stirring, a quiet bond forged not out of pity or circumstance, but out of shared strength, a promise made in silence, that no kindness is ever wasted, and no good deed ever forgotten. The weight of rumors, spring crept slowly into the valley, brushing away the memory of winter's cruelty. The snow melted first from the rooftops, then from the meadows, until the ground glistened with new grass and mud. The river near the Durand Ranch swelled with meltwater, running wild and silver through the fields. Nora had never seen such beauty. Each morning she'd step out onto the small porch of the cabin Vincent had given her, and breathe in the crisp air, feeling the warmth of sunlight on her skin again. Mary would chase after the chickens or sit by the corral, her laughter carrying across the open land. For the first time in months, the sound of laughter didn't feel out of place, but peace, Nora soon learned, is a fragile thing, easily cracked by whispers. It started in small ways. A few sidelong glances from the ranch hands during breakfast. A quiet conversation that ended the moment she walked into the kitchen. Then came the questions disguised as jokes. Reckon the boss likes his cook's biscuits a little too much, one of them said, loud enough for the others to laugh. Nora pretended not to hear. She kept stirring the pot of beans, her jaw tight. But her hands trembled. They didn't know what she'd been through. They didn't know what Vincent's kindness had meant. Yet in their eyes, she wasn't a woman working hard to survive. She was something to be speculated about, judged, dismissed. By the second week, the gossip had found its way into town. When Nora went into Silverdale to buy fabric and sugar, she could feel the eyes of the townsfolk on her, the way their voices dropped as she passed. Mrs. Talbot, the storekeeper's wife, gave her a smile so thin it could have been carved from ice. Back on your feet. Are you Mrs. Reynolds? She asked, sweetly venomous. Nora nodded. Yes, ma'am. Working at the Durand Ranch now. Oh, indeed. Quite the arrangement from what I hear. Nora froze, her pulse quickening. Meaning what, exactly? The older woman raised her brows innocently. Oh, nothing at all. It's just a widow living under the same roof as a bachelor rancher. People are bound to talk. You understand? She said it as if she were doing Nora a kindness. Nora held her gaze, refusing to let the shame take root. Mr. Durand is a decent man, Mrs. Talbot. More decent than most I've met in this town. The woman's smile faltered just for a moment. Then she looked away, feigning disinterest. Of course. My mistake. But the damage was done. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Nora sat by the cabin window, mending one of Vincent's shirts. The steady rhythm of the needle was calming, but her mind churned. She had worked so hard to rebuild her dignity, to stand tall again, and now the same small-minded cruelty that had followed her since Thomas's death was rising once more. When the door creaked open, she startled slightly. Vincent stepped in, dusted with the day's work. Evening, he said softly. Evening, she replied, forcing a smile. He noticed the tension in her face immediately. Something wrong? Nora hesitated, then sighed. It's nothing, just talk. In town, about me. About us. Vincent's eyes darkened, though his expression stayed calm. What kind of talk? She swallowed hard. The kind that turns kindness into something ugly. He said nothing at first, just set his hat down on the table and stared into the fire. The silence stretched between them until it grew heavy. Then finally he said, I can't stop people from talking, Nora, never could. But I can make sure they don't make your life harder because of it. You shouldn't have to defend me, she said softly. It's my burden to carry. He looked up, meeting her eyes. No, ma'am. Not anymore. You're part of this place now. Anyone who can't see that'll have to answer to me. His voice wasn't loud, but there was steel in it, the kind that made men stop laughing mid-breath. Nora looked away, her throat tight. You've done enough, Vincent. You gave us a home, food, safety. I can handle gossip. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. But if anyone disrespects you here, I'll set him straight. My ranch, my rules. She nodded, grateful but conflicted, because part of her wanted to fight her own battles, to stand on her own again. A few days later, the test came. It was late afternoon, the sun hanging low and gold over the fields. Nora was hanging laundry behind the cabin when she heard voices near the barn. Two of the ranch hands, Earl and Cutter, were talking loud enough for half the ranch to hear. I'm just saying, it don't sit right, Earl muttered. A woman like that gets taken in by the boss, gets her own cabin, her own pay. Ain't natural, Cutter snorted. She's got him wrapped around her little finger. Ain't no doubt. You seen the way he looks at her? Nora froze, her hands tightening on the sheet she was pinning. Reckon she'll end up Mrs. Durand before summer's out, Earl went on. Ain't that something? Poor widow. Finds herself a man with land and money. Some folks just born lucky. The words burned like acid. She dropped the sheet, turned on her heel, and marched toward them before she could think twice. Say that again, she demanded. The men spun around, startled. Earl's grin faltered. Just talking, ma'am. No harm meant. You think it's harmless to spread lies about a man who's done nothing but good, or a woman who's worked herself half to death to earn her keep? Cutter shifted uncomfortably. We didn't mean nothing by it. Just jawing. You're cowards, she said quietly. Both of you. You think you can take a man's kindness and twist it into something filthy because you don't understand it. But I'll tell you this, you don't deserve to work for him if that's how you talk about him. Earl's face reddened. Watch your tongue, lady. The sound of boots behind her stopped him cold. Vincent stood there, his shadow long in the fading light. His voice was low, dangerous. You got something to say to her, Earl, you say it to me. The ranch hand swallowed hard. Just foolin', boss. No disrespect meant. Then you won't mind packing your things and finding another outfit that tolerates fools. Vincent said evenly. You're done here. Both of you, Earl gaped. You can't be serious. Vincent stepped closer, his voice like thunder rolling over the plains. You forget yourself, son. This ranch is built on respect. You cross that line, you don't belong here. Cutter opened his mouth, then shut it again. Without another word, they turned and walked toward the bunkhouse. When they were gone, Nora turned to Vincent, trembling. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, he said simply. No man who talks like that under my roof deserves the roof. She stared at him, speechless. After a moment, he added, softer now. You shouldn't have to fight that kind of cruelty alone. Nora, not anymore. Her eyes filled with tears. I've fought it so long I don't know how to stop. He reached out, hesitated, then brushed a tear from her cheek with the back of his hand. Then let someone else fight for you just this once. For a long moment, neither moved. The sun sank lower, painting the world in gold and firelight. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. I'll find new hands tomorrow. Men who understand decency. Nora nodded, her heart aching with gratitude and something deeper she couldn't name. That night, after Mary was asleep, Nora sat outside beneath the stars. The air was cool, filled with the scent of pine and the faint hum of crickets. She thought about the day, the shame, the courage it had taken to speak up, and the way Vincent had stood beside her without hesitation. It had been so long since anyone had defended her without expecting something in return. She looked toward the main house, a single lantern glowing in the window. Somewhere in there, Vincent was likely sitting at his desk, writing ledgers or repairing gear. But she knew, deep down, that he had heard every cruel word, and it had hurt him too. Not because of pride, but because he understood. He understood what it was to be misjudged, to be whispered about by people who only saw part of the truth. The next morning, when she brought breakfast to the main house, the air between them felt different. Vincent looked up from the table as she entered. Sleep all right? She nodded. Better than I expected, he smiled faintly. You held your ground yesterday. Proud of you. Don't be, she said softly. I just got tired of swallowing my voice. Sometimes that's the bravest thing a person can do, he said. Their eyes met. And for the first time, Nora saw something in his, not just kindness, but admiration, a quiet, steady respect that ran deeper than words. As the days turned into weeks, the ranch began to heal from the tension that had briefly shadowed it. New men were hired, decent, hard-working folks who treated her with courtesy. Mary continued to thrive, her laughter once again the sweetest sound in Nora's world. But late at night, when the work was done and the stars shone bright over the valley, Nora would find herself thinking about the look in Vincent's eyes, the way it made her heart race and her fears quiet all at once. She didn't know what the future held, or whether the cruel tongues in town would ever stop wagging. But she knew this. Respect was earned, not begged for. And kindness, true kindness, didn't need defending. It defended itself in the hearts of those who lived by it. Ghosts from the road spring had settled full upon the valley. The meadows rippled with green and the scent of wildflowers drifted on the wind. The Durand ranch hummed with life, foals kicking up dust, calves bawling near the fence line, and men whistling as they repaired the corral. To Nora, the world felt lighter than it had in years. Each morning she woke to Mary's laughter and the steady rhythm of ranch life. She found joy in the simple routines, kneading bread at dawn, hanging laundry in the sunlight, gathering eggs while the hens fussed. The scars of the past still lived inside her, but they'd begun to soften. Sometimes when Vincent rode in from the far pasture and tipped his hat with that quiet smile, Nora felt something stir in her chest, something like peace, maybe even hope. But peace, she was learning, is a fragile gift, and the past has a way of finding those who think they've outrun it. It began with a rider. Late one afternoon, as thunder rolled far off beyond the ridge, Nora saw a man approaching from the east road. His horse was thin, his clothes travel-worn, and his hat pulled low. He moved like a man who carried more weight in his heart than in his saddlebags. Nora was hanging sheets near the barn when she noticed him. Something about the set of his shoulders made her uneasy. Vincent came out from the stable, wiping his hands. He watched the stranger dismount, his stance cautious but polite. The man took off his hat. "Name's Silas Reed," he said, voice gravelly. "I'm looking for Mrs. Nora Reynolds." The world seemed to tilt. Nora's fingers went slack, the sheet fluttering to the ground. I'm Mrs. Reynolds," she said, her throat tight. Silas's eyes softened, but there was something wary behind them. "Thought so. You favor your husband. God rest him," her breath caught. "You knew Thomas?" "Knew him, worked with him. We ran freight out of Denver 2 winters back. He spoke of you often. Said you had a laugh that could make a man forget his troubles." Nora swallowed hard, torn between sorrow and suspicion. "That was before he died," Silas nodded. I was there, ma'am. Or near enough. He went fast. Didn't suffer long. Told me if I ever found you, I was to see you safe." The ache in her chest returned, raw and sudden. "That was kind of him." Silas shifted on his feet, glancing at Vincent. "You must be the one she's staying with." Vincent gave a nod, cautious but firm. "Vincent Durand. I own this place." Silas's eyes flicked over him, assessing. "Good spread you got here." Vincent didn't reply. His tone, when he finally spoke, was even. "If you're here to talk with Mrs. Reynolds, you can do it inside, out of the sun." Inside the cabin, the air felt close, thick with memory. Nora poured water for the man, her hands steady even as her pulse hammered. Silas removed his coat, revealing a weathered face and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. He looked like a man who'd known hunger, dust, and disappointment. He took a long drink before setting the cup down. "Your husband wasn't much for planning ahead, God bless him. Left some debts behind. Weren't his fault entirely. Freight got ambushed out by Bent Creek, but the folks he owed don't care much for reasons." Nora's stomach dropped. "Debts?" Silas nodded. "To a man named Gorman, loan shark out of Denver. Ugly sort. I ran into one of his boys last month. Said Gorman means to collect either from Thomas's estate or from his widow." Vincent stiffened. "She don't owe a cent." Silas shrugged. "Don't matter to Gorman. He don't see widows or orphans, just opportunity." Nora felt her voice crack. "I have nothing left. Thomas died broke. We lost the house, the wagon, everything," Silas sighed. "I told them that. They said they'd come for you anyway. Thought you might have found better circumstances." His gaze flicked around the cozy cabin, then to the warm bread cooling on the table. Vincent's eyes narrowed. "If they come here, they'll leave empty-handed." Silas hesitated. "You're a good man to say that. But Gorman's not the kind to ask twice. He sends men who don't use words." A long silence fell. The wind rattled the window panes. Finally Nora whispered, How long do we have?" Silas rubbed his chin. A week, maybe 2. They're coming down through Leadville, last I heard. I can stall them if you want, but they'll find you sooner or later. After Silas left, the ranch felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. That evening, Nora sat outside watching the horizon, her thoughts a storm. She'd worked so hard to build something good again, and now the past threatened to burn it down. Vincent joined her, leaning against the porch post. "You all right?" She shook her head. He always meant well, Thomas did. But he borrowed from the wrong people. Tried to get us ahead. Now it's come to this. Vincent crossed his arms, jaw tight. This ain't on you. Whatever trouble he left behind, it died with him. But men like Gorman don't believe in letting things die, she said softly. He was quiet for a moment. Then you trust that fella, Silas? I don't know, he seemed honest but tired, like a man trying to do right after doing wrong for too long. Vincent nodded slowly. I'll keep watch. If Gorman's men show up here, they'll wish they hadn't. Vincent, he looked at her then, his eyes hard but kind. You've been through enough, Nora. Ain't no one taken from you again, not while I'm breathing. Something in his voice made her chest tighten. I can't let you risk the ranch because of me. This ranch ain't just mine anymore, he said. It's ours. All of us who live and work here. You belong here, Nora. You and Mary both. Tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to argue, but the truth in his words broke through her defenses. For the first time, someone had said you belong, not as charity. Not as pity, but as fact. She nodded silently. 3 nights later, trouble arrived. The air was heavy with the smell of rain when 2 riders came through the front gate. Their horses were sleek, their coats black as coal. The men wore dusters and carried the kind of confidence that came from violence. Vincent met them at the porch, rifle resting against his shoulder. One of the men dismounted, flashing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Fine evening, mister. We're looking for a woman named Nora Reynolds. Heard she's settling somewhere around here. Vincent's tone was cool as Riverstone. Can't say I know anyone by that name, the man chuckled. Now that's funny, 'cause my boss said she's been seen cooking meals at this very ranch. Vincent shifted, blocking the door. Your boss can take it up with me. You got business here, you say it plain. The second man, still on his horse, spoke for the first time. We're here to collect. She owes our employer $200 and change. You pay or we take collateral. Vincent's grip tightened on the rifle. Ain't gonna happen. Then maybe we just take her with us. Gorman don't mind working off debt the old-fashioned way. A flash of anger crossed Vincent's face. You take one more step toward that door and I'll put you in the dirt. The man smirked. You wouldn't dare. The thunder cracked overhead like a warning shot. Vincent didn't flinch. Try me. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Then the rider spat into the dirt. Fine. You tell your widow friend this ain't over. We'll be back, with more men and less talk. They turned their horses and galloped off into the night, the sound fading into the storm. When they were gone, Nora stepped out from behind the curtain where she'd been hiding. Pale but composed. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered. They'll come back. Vincent looked at her, rain dripping from his hat brim. Then we'll be ready. She wanted to argue, to tell him this wasn't his fight. But deep down she knew something had changed, something she couldn't undo. He hadn't just defended her. He'd claimed her fight as his own, and somewhere in her heart, that terrified and comforted her all at once. That night, as the rain poured down, Vincent sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle. His thoughts were heavy, filled with the shadow of what was coming. Nora sat nearby, mending a tear in Mary's blanket. The firelight danced across her face, revealing both fear and resolve. Finally, she said softly, You shouldn't have to protect me. Vincent looked up. Maybe not, but I will. She hesitated, then whispered, Why? Why risk so much for someone who brings nothing but trouble? He met her gaze steadily. Because I remember a woman in a cold town, trying to trade her hair for bread. And because sometimes what you do for one soul makes up for all the wrong you've seen. The words hung in the quiet, glowing space between them. And though the storm outside raged, inside the little cabin, Nora felt something she hadn't in years. Safety. The storm that night did more than water the earth. It changed it. When the thunder faded and dawn broke over the Durand Ranch, the land smelled of renewal. The hills shimmered with dew, but the people who lived there carried a tension that wouldn't wash away with the rain. The men spoke in hushed tones over breakfast, eyes flicking to the window every time a rider passed the road. Vincent's jaw was set tighter than usual. Nora noticed the shadows beneath his eyes. He hadn't slept much, if at all. Mary, innocent to the danger around her, played with the ranch dog near the barn, her laughter a fragile reminder of hope in an uncertain world. Nora wished she could borrow that innocence. Just for a moment, she tried to lose herself in chores, kneading bread, sweeping floors, tending the garden, but her mind kept circling back to Silas Reed's warning. Gorman's not the kind to ask twice. That afternoon, Silas returned. His horse was lathered and trembling, its flanks streaked with mud. He swung down, face grim. "They're on their way," he said without preamble. 4 of them this time, maybe 5. "Gorman's coming himself." Vincent nodded slowly, unsurprised. "How long?" "Tomorrow by dusk, maybe sooner." "They're riding hard." Nora's breath caught. "Can we go?" "Take Mary and hide." Vincent shook his head. "They'd burn the place down looking for you." "No, this ends here," Silas grimaced. "He's right. Men like Gorman don't stop until they've made an example. Only way to be done with them is to stand your ground." Nora looked between them, fear clawing at her chest. "Stand our ground? Against hired guns?" Vincent's gaze was steady. "Against bullies. There's a difference." That evening, the ranch prepared for a siege. The hands fortified the barn doors, stacked hay bales for cover, and loaded extra ammunition. The youngest, Caleb, was sent to town to fetch the sheriff. Nora packed a small satchel with essentials, food, medicine, and Mary's favorite doll, just in case they had to run. But Vincent seemed calm, almost eerily so. He moved through the preparations with quiet purpose, checking each latch, each weapon, each man. When Nora found him in the stable, tightening his horse's saddle, she couldn't hold her fear in any longer. "This isn't your fight, Vincent," she said softly. "They're coming for me, not you." He didn't look up. "My land, my people, my problem." She stepped closer. "You could still walk away." Finally, he turned to face her. The firelight from a lantern flickered across his face, sharp and beautiful in its resolve. "I buried my mother alone on a winter's night," he said quietly, "watched her suffer because no one would help. I swore if I ever had the means, no woman, no child would go through that again. You're here now, Nora. That means you're under my care. That's the promise I made to myself. I won't break it." Her voice trembled. "And if it cost you your life?" He held her gaze. "Then it'll be worth something." As the sun dipped below the horizon, silence settled over the ranch. Even the horses seemed to sense what was coming. Nora tucked Mary into bed, kissing her forehead. "You stay quiet, sweetheart, no matter what you hear." "Promise, Mama?" Mary's small voice whispered back. "I promise." When Nora stepped outside again, the night was alive with stars and the faint, far-off sound of hooves. By the time the riders reached the gate, the men of the ranch were waiting. 5 figures emerged from the darkness, their faces half hidden beneath the brims of their hats. In the center rode Gorman, a man with a silver vest, polished boots, and eyes like cold slate. He smiled as if he were greeting old friends. "Evening, boys," he drawled. "Fine night for settling debts, don't you think?" Vincent stepped forward, rifle slung casually in one hand. "You've come a long way for nothing, Gorman. There's no debt here." Gorman dismounted slowly, brushing dust from his coat. "That's so. Funny, I got papers say otherwise. Husband borrowed $200. Interest compounded monthly. Widow inherits the liability. You'll not get a dime," Vincent said. Gorman chuckled. "Oh, I'll get something. Question is, do I take it in dollars? Or dignity?" At that, Nora stepped out from the porch, trembling but resolute. "You'll take neither." Gorman turned to her, his grin widening. "Well, if it ain't the brave little widow herself. Heard plenty about you, ma'am. Word travels. Shame your husband didn't have your spine. Maybe he'd still be breathing." Vincent's hand flexed on his rifle. "Watch your mouth," Gorman smirked. "Easy there, cowboy. I'm just talking business. The lady here owes me. She can pay in coin or service. I'm not particular." The disgust that flashed across Nora's face was sharp enough to wound. Vincent took one deliberate step closer. "You're done talking," Gorman laughed. "Oh, I see how it is. The lady's found herself a new protector. That right, Nora? This rancher your savior now?" She lifted her chin. He's a better man than you'll ever be. The smile faded. Careful, ma'am. I've broken men for less. Vincent's voice dropped low, cold as steel. You'll find I'm not so easy to break. The standoff hung in the air, thick as thunder. One of Gorman's men reached for his revolver. Vincent moved faster. A crack split the night. One warning shot fired into the dirt between their boots. The echo rolled across the valley. Next one, don't miss, Vincent said evenly. Gorman's smirk faltered. His eyes flicked to the shadows around the barn, where more rifles waited. He realized then that Durand Ranch wasn't just one man. It was a community standing behind its own. He spat into the dirt. You think you can scare me off? Vincent stepped forward, unblinking. Not scaring you, Gorman. Just showing you what right looks like. The wind shifted, rustling through the grass. Somewhere in the distance, the faint clatter of hooves announced new arrivals. The sheriff and 2 deputies, rifles drawn. Evening, gentlemen, Sheriff Carter called. Heard there might be some trouble. Gorman's jaw tightened. The sheriff dismounted. Got word from Leadville. Seems you've been extorting widows again, Gorman. I got papers too, warrants this time. Vincent's men stepped aside as the sheriff approached. Gorman's hand twitched near his gun, but the deputies had theirs already drawn. I'd think twice, Carter warned. You're outnumbered and outgunned. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then Gorman slowly raised his hands. This ain't over, he hissed. Oh, it's over, Vincent said. You just don't know it yet. The deputies disarmed him and his men, binding their wrists. As they were led away, Gorman turned one last venomous look toward Nora. You'll regret this, woman, he spat. She met his glare, steady as mountain stone. I already did. Now I'm done. When the riders disappeared into the darkness, the ranch exhaled as one. Nora leaned against the porch post, shaking with relief. Vincent stepped beside her, holstering his rifle. You all right? He asked quietly. She nodded, though tears glistened in her eyes. You saved us. He looked out toward the road. No, ma'am. You saved yourself the moment you stopped bowing to fear. She turned to him then, emotion thick in her throat. You risked your life for me, for Mary, why? He hesitated, searching for words. Because sometimes people forget what decency looks like. And sometimes it takes standing up for someone else to remind them. She swallowed hard. I don't know how to repay you. Vincent's voice softened. You already have. You made this place a home again. Later that night, after the sheriff's party was long gone, Nora stood outside beneath the moonlight. The land stretched out before her, wild, quiet, infinite. Vincent joined her, silent for a long while. Feels different now, she murmured. Like something's been lifted, he nodded. Storm's past. She looked up at him, her heart heavy and full. I never believed in second chances before. Vincent's eyes softened. Then believe now. Their gazes held, and in that still moment, surrounded by the vast silence of the plains, Nora realized she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. The measure of a man weeks passed, and the valley seemed to breathe again. The air turned sweet with summer. The fields bursting in color and sound, the hum of bees, the soft rush of wind through cottonwoods, the distant thunder of horses on the range. The ranch, once tense and wary, was alive again with laughter and work. Gorman's arrest had made the rounds in Silverdale and beyond. Word spread fast of the widow and the cowboy who had stood their ground against outlaws and greed. Most folks told the story like it was legend, half truth, half miracle. But for Nora Reynolds, it was something simpler. It was freedom. For the first time since Thomas's death, she woke without dread. No debt collectors, no cold gnawing hunger, no nightmares of loss, just peace, the kind that grew from honest work, warm meals, and people who looked out for one another. Still, even peace has questions, buried beneath it, and one question lingered in her heart every time she looked at Vincent. Durand. He had become more than her rescuer. He was her, constant, a quiet strength in every storm. His presence calmed her, and his silence spoke louder than most men's words. Mary adored him, following him from barn to pasture like a second shadow. And yet, for all the time they'd spent together, there was a part of him she could not quite reach. Some nights she'd find him outside alone, staring toward the distant hills as if haunted by something she couldn't see. When she asked, he'd just say, "Some ghosts are better left buried." But Nora had lived long enough to know that buried ghosts never stay quiet for long. One evening in late July, the sky burned pink and gold over the horizon. The men had gone to town for supplies, and Mary was asleep in her little bed clutching her doll. Nora stood on the porch watching Vincent mend the fence along the edge of the pasture. The fading light caught in his hair, and she thought, he looks like a man built from this land itself, strong, weathered, and unyielding. When he finished, he washed his hands at the pump, glancing up to find her watching. "Fence'll hold another season," he said with a faint smile. She returned it softly. "You never stop working, do you?" "Idle hands make for restless hearts," he said. She hesitated, then stepped down from the porch. "Vincent, can I ask you something?" "Course. Before you came to Silverdale, before all this, who were you really?" He went still. The easy warmth in his expression faded, replaced by that guarded quiet she'd seen before. "Why do you ask?" "Because I think you're a man who's run from something. Not out of shame, but pain." He studied her face for a long moment, then sighed. "You ever hear of the Duran Mining Company out of Cheyenne?" She blinked. "The one that folded after the cave collapse?" He nodded. "My father owned it. When the mine caved, 12 men died. He blamed the workers for cutting corners, but I knew better. I'd seen the ledgers. He'd been taking shortcuts, buying cheap timber to save money. I told him I'd testify." Nora's eyes widened. "Testify? Against your own father?" He nodded again, voice heavy. "Didn't go well. Family turned their backs on me. Sold my share of the business and left town. Been ranching ever since. Never looked back." She stepped closer, her heart aching for him. "That's why you couldn't stand to see someone bullied or cheated." Vincent's gaze dropped to the ground. "When I saw you in Wilson's store that day, something in me broke all over again. I thought about all the times I could have helped and didn't. I wasn't going to let that happen again." Nora's throat tightened. "You didn't just help. You gave us our lives back." He gave a small, almost rueful smile. "Maybe you gave mine back too." The night deepened around them, quiet but alive with crickets and the soft murmur of the creek. Nora turned toward the horizon, where stars began to flicker in the dark. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "why kind people are always the ones tested hardest?" Vincent looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because kindness only proves itself when it costs something." His words hung in the air, heavy and true, and for a long while, neither of them spoke. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Sheriff Carter rode up with a letter in hand, his face split by a grin. "Got some news, Durand. Thought you'd want to see this yourself." Vincent wiped his hands on his trousers and took the paper. His eyes scanned the page, then widened. "What is it?" Nora asked, worry creeping in. He looked up, astonished. "Gorman's assets are being seized. Turns out he's wanted in 3 counties for fraud and assault. The governor himself signed off on restitution." "Restitution?" Carter nodded. "Means every victim of his schemes is owed compensation. Mrs. Reynolds, that includes you." Nora froze. "Me?" Vincent handed her the letter. It stated clearly that as one of Gorman's defrauded debtors, she was entitled to the full repayment of her husband's loan, plus damages. Her hands trembled as she read the total, $200, $1,200. More money than she'd ever held in her life. Enough to rebuild her homestead twice over, or even buy new land outright. Vincent's voice was quiet. "Seems the world finally caught up with justice." Nora stared at the letter, tears filling her eyes. "After everything, I don't know what to do with this," he smiled gently. "Start living, maybe." That evening, she sat at the kitchen table long after Mary was asleep. The letter spread before her like a dream she couldn't quite believe. Vincent entered quietly, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "You've been staring at that paper a while," he said, setting 1 cup beside her. "It doesn't feel real," she whispered. "All my life I've scraped by, begging, bargaining, burying pieces of myself to survive. And now this? Maybe it's not a gift," he said. "Maybe it's the world finally paying what it owes." She smiled faintly. "What about you? You deserve more than this ranch, more than hard days and lonely nights." He chuckled softly. "You think I'm lonely? Aren't you?" He looked at her with eyes full of something deeper than words. "Not anymore." Her breath caught. He reached across the table, his rough hand covering hers. "Nora, you and Mary, you belong here. Not as guests, not as debts to be repaid, but as family. If you'll have me." Tears welled up, but this time they were soft, grateful tears. "You mean that?" He nodded. I meant it the day I said, keep your hair, I'll feed you both. Only difference now is I'm asking you to stay for good. She stood, heart pounding, and took his face gently in her hands. Then feed us for the rest of your life, cowboy. The laughter that followed was quiet but full of light, the kind that comes only after years of darkness. Epilogue months later, the valley turned gold again with autumn. The Durand Ranch thrived, fields full, barns sturdy, hearths warm. Nora oversaw the kitchen with her sleeves rolled, singing as she worked. Mary, now 5, chased the ranch dog through the yard, her giggles ringing like bells, and Vincent, her husband now, though she still called him Cowboy when she wanted to see that shy smile, worked beside his men, steady and content. Sometimes travelers stopped by, hearing the tale of the widow and the rancher who defied a gang. They'd ask if the stories were true. Vincent would grin and say, "Depends which part you mean." "But I reckon the truth's better in the story," Nora would add, "and the lesson's the same either way. Never measure a person by what they've lost. Measure them by what they keep: kindness, dignity, and hope." That night, under a blanket of stars, she brushed her daughter's hair by lamplight. Mary looked up and asked, "Mama, why did Mr. Vincent help us that day?" Nora smiled softly. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, the right people find you when you're almost out of faith." She looked out toward the fields, where Vincent was securing the gate for the night, his silhouette strong and sure against the moonlight, and she whispered to herself, "And sometimes the best miracles wear dust and spurs."